It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was driving home from a late shift at work. The rain was pouring down in sheets, and the wind was howling as she made her way down the deserted country road. She had always been afraid of driving alone at night, but she had no choice but to brave the storm. As she drove, Sarah noticed a car following her. At first, she thought nothing of it, assuming it was just another driver heading home. But as the car stayed behind her, she began to feel uneasy. The headlights were too bright, and the car was tailgating her dangerously close. Sarah tried to shake the car off, but it stayed close behind her, following her every turn. She began to panic as the car seemed to be getting closer and closer. She could hear the sound of the engine roaring behind her, drowning out the sound of the rain battering against her windshield. Suddenly, the car behind her flashed its high beams, blinding her momentarily. When her vision cleared, she saw that the car had pulled up alongside her. Sarah could see a figure inside, but the windows were tinted, and she couldn't make out who it was. As she continued to drive, the car stayed alongside her, keeping pace with her every move. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest, and she gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white. She tried to speed up, but the car matched her pace effortlessly. After what felt like an eternity, the car finally pulled away, turning down a side road and disappearing into the night. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief, but her relief was short-lived. As she drove further down the road, she suddenly saw the car again, parked in the middle of the road, blocking her path. Sarah tried to slam on her brakes, but it was too late. She crashed into the car, sending her spinning out of control. When she came to, Sarah was surrounded by darkness. She tried to move, but she realized that she was trapped, pinned inside her car. She could see the figure from the other car approaching her, and she screamed for help. But as the figure got closer, Sarah realized that it was not a person at all. It was something else entirely, something twisted and malevolent, something that had been stalking her all along. And as the headlights of the other car flickered on, illuminating the creature in all its horror, Sarah knew that she was in for a long, terrifying night. As the sun set and the skies grew dark, Mark set off on a long drive home from a business trip. The only sounds in the car were the hum of the engine and the soft tapping of the rain against the windshield. Mark was exhausted, and his eyes grew heavy as he drove through the deserted roads. Suddenly, he saw something in the middle of the road, and he slammed on the brakes. As he got out of the car to investigate, he saw that it was a man, disheveled and soaked to the bone. The man stared at him with wild eyes, and Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. Ignoring his unease, Mark invited the man to sit in the passenger seat, hoping to help him out. But as they drove deeper into the countryside, the man's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would mutter to himself and stare out the window as if seeing something that wasn't there. Mark tried to make conversation, but the man ignored him, lost in his own world of fear and paranoia. And then, without warning, the man lunged at Mark, grabbing him by the throat. Mark struggled to break free, but the man's grip was ironclad. And as he looked into the man's eyes, he saw something terrible lurking within them. Something dark and malevolent, something that wanted to do him harm. In fear for his life, Mark fought back with all his might, managing to break free and push the man out of the car. As he drove away, he could see the man's face contorted with rage, his eyes fixed on Mark with a hatred that chilled him to the bone. When Mark finally arrived home, he collapsed into bed, his heart racing with fear. And as he lay there, he couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there somewhere, waiting for him in the darkness. I woke up to the sound of rain pounding against my window. It was dark outside, and the only light came from the street lamps that flickered in the storm. I knew I had to make it home, but the thought of driving in this weather made my stomach churn. Despite my reservations, I decided to brave the storm and drive home. I got in my car and started driving down the empty streets. The rain was so heavy that I could barely see the road ahead of me. My windshield wipers were working overtime, but it didn't seem to make much of a difference. As I drove through the deserted streets, I began to feel uneasy. It was as if I was being watched by something in the darkness. My heart began to race as I realized that I was not alone on the road. Suddenly, I saw a figure in the distance. It was a man standing on the side of the road. He was drenched from the rain and he looked like he was in distress. I hesitated for a moment, but then I decided to pull over and offer him a ride. The man got into my car and thanked me for stopping. He said that his car had broken down and he needed a lift to the nearest gas station. As we drove, we made small talk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. We drove for what felt like hours, and the rain showed no signs of letting up. Suddenly, the man in the passenger seat turned to me and smiled. It was then that I noticed his eyes. They were completely black with no pupils or whites. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth and whispered, "Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you." I was frozen with terror as he began to tell me his story. He said that he was not human, but a demon that had taken on a human form. He had been waiting for someone to pick him up, and he had chosen me. He told me that he was going to take me to his world, a place of eternal darkness and suffering. I was trapped with no way out. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that this was the end. Suddenly, the car came to a screeching halt. The rain had stopped and the sun was peeking over the horizon. I turned to look at the passenger seat, but the man was gone. It was as if he had never been there. I drove home in a daze, wondering if it had all been a dream. But the memory of the man with the black eyes stayed with me, haunting me for years to come. I knew that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, and I would never forget that scary night drive.